In the next few minutes, you're going to learn 3 powerful tips from St. John Paul II on how to actually fundraise for a Catholic organization. Hi, I'm Brice Sokolowski, the founder of CatholicFundraiser.net, a website that is completely dedicated to helping Catholics just like you with their fundraising. So whether you're starting out, you're looking to improve your fundraising, you're looking for new ideas on how to fundraise, well, you are in the right place. And before we dive into what St. John Paul II said about fundraising, I want to recommend that you download absolutely for free the 10 Commandments to Catholic Fundraising. These are 10 things that I've learned really help me with my fundraising. It's been downloaded by thousands and thousands of Catholics, and the overall consensus is 2 thumbs up. So I highly recommend that you download absolutely for free the 10 Commandments to Catholic Fundraising. The link is right below, whether you're watching this on YouTube, my website, or my podcast. Link is right below. Okay, St. John Paul II. You shouldn't need much of an introduction. Great Pope. The Pope, when I was growing up, really inspired me. Was blessed to have met him, seen him 2 times for World Youth Day, and really transformed my life. And one of the documents that he wrote, and you're going to see me looking down or pausing, that's because I'm looking at my notes, which you can access for free as well. They're right below. There's going to be the script, and there's going to be a whole bunch of links, so you can follow along. So John Paul II wrote this Apostolic Exhortation called CHRISTIFIDELES LAICI, which is Latin for the faithful lay in Christ. The specific translation is the vocation and the mission of the lay faithful in the church in the world. And so this document, I was reading from the recommendation of a deacon. He said this is a fantastic document. And so I dug in, and I actually found 3, I think, very, very important lessons when it comes to fundraising for Catholics. So here are my 3 recommendations from St. Paul II from this Apostolic Exhortation, which are really going to help you with your fundraising. The first recommendation is our place in the church. So we first need to understand that we are different from priests and religious. What do I mean by that? Well, we do not have the same vocations. We are all called to sainthood. We are all called to have a relationship with God. But how we go about and do it is different. And I'm quoting St. Paul, John Paul II. He says the lay state of life has its distinctive feature in its secular character. All the members of the church are sharers in this secular dimension, but in different ways. So he's emphasizing that we're different. The lay faithful has its own manner of realization and function, which according to the council is properly and particularly theirs. I think he's referencing the Vatican II, if I remember correctly. So the reason I emphasize this is I meet lay people who, for one reason or another, I don't know if they do it intentionally, but they mix up that their vocation is very similar to priests and religious. We do not take a vow of poverty. We do not take a vow of huge amounts of prayer life. If you are consecrated layperson connected with a religious order, that's a bit different. But if you're like me and you're not necessarily connected to a religious order, you have a different vocation, and that vocation is within the secular world. And so why is this important? Well, the secular world, we're surrounded by material goods. So the importance is, number one, recognizing the difference, that we are in the secular world. We are very similar, but at the same time, we're different than religious people. So how do we move along with this difference? Well, that comes down to point number 2, our role in the mission of the church. And so John Paul II says the missionary concern is taking on such an extensive and serious proportions for the church that only a true consolidated effort to assume responsibility by all members. So we're definitely called to do something. So we do have a role, And I continue with John Paul II. He says, the world becomes the place and the means for the lay faithful to fulfill their Christian vocation. And he continues on to kind of explain where our place is. There are persons who live an ordinary life in the world. So lay people are ordinary people who live life in the world. And he mentions they study, they work, they form relationships as friends, professionals, members of society, cultures. So we are called to study. We are called to work. We are called to form relations with people, professional people, members of society. We're called to go out there and build relationships with people. And this is important with fundraising because, well, now we're getting into the fundraising aspect. We're called to go out there and meet people because that's where we are. And that's really going to help with fundraising because if you don't know people, very difficult to be raising any funds because donations come from people that know you or know the nonprofit or the religious order of the parish that you are fundraising for. So you've got to be out there and you got to be meeting people. So the third point that I want to emphasize from St. John Paul II is what exactly do we do? We now know our role, going out and meeting people. What do we do with that? And St. John Paul II says in his Apostolic Exhortation, he says the lay faithful have the responsibility of being in the forefront in working out a solution to raise up new forms of entrepreneurship and to look again at systems of commerce, finance, and exchange of technology. This is really important because my whole style of fundraising is these three things. This form of entrepreneurship, we've got to, if we're missionary, we got to be building things up from the ground up. That's very entrepreneurial. We've got to look at systems of commerce. How do we exchange funds? How do we ask people for donations? We've got to look at this in a different way. And we've got to think about the exchange of technology. There's tons of different types of technology that will really, really help you with your fundraising that I'm using and that I'm really recommending on my website. If you speak to me ever, if you read my emails, if you watch my videos, I talk about these. So this is what we're supposed to be doing, especially when it comes to fundraising. And one other point that St. John Paul II mentions is the lay faithful are never to relinquish their participation in public life. That is, in the many different economic, social, legislative, administrative, and cultural areas which are intended to promote organically and institutionally, and institutionally the common good. So we cannot hide away from public life. We've got to be out there because, well, religious sometimes they're busy with what they're doing. We're called definitely to go out there and make a difference. So I really recommend that with your fundraising, that you go out there and you meet people and you use these different forms of technology. You think about how do I build something up and how do I exchange commerce, and which is for fundraising is donations, the exchange of money. How does all this come into play? Okay, much longer video than normal. I hope that you really enjoyed it. Please share this with a friend. Please leave a comment below. Please reach out to me if you have any other questions about fundraising. God love you, and I look forward to speaking with you next week. Bye-bye.